So you want to read comic books, but there are a lot of comic books and they're all really different and confusing, and what even are comic books? Is a graphic novel a different thing? Oh my god! Be calm, gentle viewer, for I am here to give you a starter's guide to comic books. Now, I myself have very recently gotten into comics. In fact, most of the comics I own were bought within the last year. So I'm not here to try to tell you I'm an expert, but I do know what it's like to be super confused and overwhelmed and have no idea where to start. First of all, I want to remind you that comic books are not a genre, they're a medium. Which means that if you say something like, I just don't like comic books, that's like telling your friends that you just don't like TV shows. It really doesn't make sense. Within comic books, there are just as many genres as they are of regular books. If you like horror, you can read The Walking Dead. If you like romance, if you like comedy, if you like action, there are comic books that fit all of these things. So the very first thing I would do is pick whatever your favorite genre is, fantasy, sci-fi, whatever, and just Google top 5 comics in blank genre. You'll be surprised how much you can learn with just a quick Google search. Second thing I want to remind you is that not all comic books produce really sexist imagery. This was something I was afraid of when I was picking up comic books, is that I wasn't going to find anything that was really good for me to read. Everything would be half-naked women or rape scenes or just all the stuff I didn't want to see on the page. So if you're worried about things like that, buy comic books that are made for you. There are things like In Real Life that are about teen girls learning about video games, or Herville, which is a comic book about a teenage Orthodox Jewish girl who dresses appropriately for her religion. Or you have things like Miss Marvel, comic books that are specifically designed to be more inclusive to women. There really are lots of options. You just have to be willing to do a little digging. And when you're at the store, don't hesitate to just flip through it. If the first picture you see is like big naked boobies, then you might be able to guess that's not your style of comic. Just be careful when doing this because sometimes the pictures can end up having a lot of spoilers. Now maybe you're still thinking to yourself, that seems overwhelming, I just want something that's easy to pick up, and you want something that you just know you're gonna like. This is where expansion comics come in. What I mean by expansion comics is something that is continuing something that already exists. So maybe it's additional content to a TV show or a video game or follow-up to a movie. A few examples are the Avatar: The Last Airbender comics, which are taking place in between the TV shows Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. The Avatar comics were actually pretty much the first ones I read because since I loved the show so much, I knew I'd be guaranteed to like it. But there are also comic books for Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Once Upon a Time and The Guild, written by Felicia Day, and Dragon Age and Mass Effect. There are tons of expansion comics, so if you already like these video games, you know you're gonna like the comics at least alright. So just pick out whatever your favorite TV show is and Google blank TV show comic books. You'd be amazed how much stuff came up. I had no idea Once Upon a Time comic books existed until I was trying to find a t-shirt for the show and just stumbled across the comics. Or maybe you're someone who really loves to read the classics, but they always seem like they're a little too long. Why don't you try the comic book edition? This is the Campfire Comics edition for Jekyll and Hyde. It's the exact same story as the original, but being retold in comic book format. So it's a lot easier to read and it has beautiful artwork to go along with it. My next recommendation would be for you to watch videos like the one I'm making right now. There are tons of people on YouTube talking about comic books day in and day out. My personal favorite is Amy Dallin. She was making a lot of comic book videos back when there was still Geek and Sundry vlogs, so that's how I found out about her. And since then, she's continued to do a ton of stuff about comic books on YouTube. And every time I watch her, I'm just filled with so many good ideas. In fact, a large portion of the comics currently on my shelf are things she directly recommended. Now maybe you're thinking, Andy, I want to read comics, but I don't really like the comic book style. And I feel you, all of the like, wha-pow, bam, oh my god, cheesy one-liner here. It can end up being a bit much, and honestly, it's not everyone's cup of tea, and that's fine. That's why there are so many different types of comics, because you can find whatever one works for you. For example, I own Alison Bechdel's Are You My Mother? This is a graphic novel, but it's actually her memoir. So this is something that could have been written as a standard novel, but instead she chose to include the artwork. Now with something like this, you might be thinking, what's the point of it being a graphic novel? But always remember that with comics, the artwork is important. It's not just there to add color to the page. The artwork is contributing to the story. And if you're reading Are You My Mother, I encourage you to keep track of how many birds and bird cages you see and how they change throughout the story, because you're gonna notice something that is never actually said in the text, but is really important to the plot and just Allison's journey as a person. So there you go. We're not even finished with the video yet, and I've told you about memoirs, I've told you about video game comics, I've told you about superheroes, I've told you about horror and comedy. I think you should be feeling pretty good. I am gonna go ahead and throw out Saga just because anytime you look up best comics, what kind of comics should I read, Saga is gonna come up. This is a sci-fi piece, so if you like shows like Star Trek, you'll probably like this. Then I'll mention The Wicked and the Divine. The Wicked and the Divine uses a very disjointed form of storytelling. It almost reminds me of like a Tarantino film, the way you're just kind of thrown in and you're really forced to figure stuff out on your own. And if you're someone who really enjoys role-playing games, whether that's board games or video games, I would recommend Rat Queens. Rat Queens follows a guild of badass ladies who are typically just adventurers but are sort of forced to action when something very strange starts happening in their city. I also want to shout out to Rat Queens because while they have very sexy ladies in this, they don't have sexualized ladies in this. Hopefully you understand the difference there. Okay, so that was a lot of information. That was a lot of me just talking to you about comic books. I hope that I gave you some good ideas of where to start, what things you might enjoy, and maybe just open your mind to the idea of comic books in general. The final recommendation I'm going to give is my general one-size-fits-all graphic novel, and that's Nimona. I honestly believe that this is something everyone can enjoy. This book takes a twist on what defines heroes and villains. It deals with homosexuality, there's diversity in races, the main character is a bit chubby. It really does just have everything. I actually read this entire graphic novel in one sitting. It was amazing. I also think that this is a great one to be your first ever graphic novel because it does have the artwork and it's really fun. It's kind of reminds me of Adventure Time, but it is very text-based. It's very story-based. So if you're someone who's a little nervous about getting into comic books because it's so different than a regular novel, I think Nimona is a really good place to start because it reads very much like a traditional novel. And that's it. That's your introduction to comic books. Hopefully that information helps you get your search underway and helps you realize that it's not as scary as it seems, even if it does seem really scary. And my devout promise that no matter what you're thinking, there is a comic book out there that you're going to enjoy. Now, if you'll excuse me, after talking about all these, I'm very desperate to do some rereading of these comics. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.